Hello, you're about to listen to the Chequered Flag podcast. We recorded the pod after qualifying, but before Sergio Perez and Nico Hülkenberg had been to see the stewards. And it's since been announced that Perez has been given a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Hülkenberg and will now start the race from P6. That means Lando Norris is promoted to P3, Charles Leclerc will start from P4, and Oscar Piastri, the home hero, will start from P5. I hope you will still enjoy the podcast.
5 Live Formula One.
Welcome to the paddock here at Albert Park Circuit. It's still very busy after the qualifying session we've just watched. Lots of fans lingering around this very leafy and green paddock, trying to get a glimpse of the drivers. And it was Max Verstappen who put it on pole position for the Australian Grand Prix ahead of Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. And it was Max Verstappen's teammate Sergio Perez completing the top 3. I'm Rosanna Tennant, and I'm joined by our lead commentator Harry Benjamin and former McLaren F1 mechanic Mark Priestley. Harry Benjamin, we thought perhaps Max Verstappen didn't have it sewn up this weekend, but then he goes and pops it on pole. Were you surprised to see him right up there again?
We dreamed, and ultimately, well, our dreams were absolutely shattered. Verstappen pulling out an extra few tenths right at the very end. But we had a fun ride getting there. At least it wasn't straight off the bat. And I think it's fair to say that Verstappen and Red Bull haven't looked comfortable across the course of the weekend, but then he just hooks it up when he needs to. The only man to get into the 115s as well in qualifying. But I'm massively impressed with Carlos Sainz off the back of this as well. To be within a few tenths from coming back from his appendix surgery, I'm so impressed, and it's G'd me up that actually this is closer than it has been. There is a bit of a fight going on, and that's what we want. It doesn't matter if Verstappen goes and sets pole and goes and wins. There's a fight, there's jeopardy, and that's what we want, and I'm happy.
Oh, well, that's good. You've turned that around. I thought you were a little bit defeated and dejected at the beginning of that answer.
I took you on a journey with that answer, and we ended up at the top of the roller coaster.
Well, I was going to say it's been a roller coaster weekend, hasn't it, for many drivers? And we'll come on to some of the sub-stories and plots going on here in Melbourne a little later in the podcast. But Mark, Harry's right. I mean, it wasn't plain sailing for Max Verstappen. He's had new engine parts this weekend. He's had damaged floor to deal with. So actually, he's kind of risen to the top with a few little obstacles on the way.
Yeah, 100%, and it's not something we've got used to saying or seeing, is it? It's generally been quite comfortable for him, such as the dominance of that Red Bull car, and in the hands of Max Verstappen especially. But this weekend, you know, we've seen that they are fallible. It's not wheel it out the back of the truck, put it on a racetrack, and it blows everything else away. They've had to really work hard to kind of fine-tune the car over the course of the practice sessions to get to a point where, you know, let's take nothing away from him. Max delivered an unbelievable lap, really quick, right throughout the lap, and it meant that no one was even able to get that close to him. Carlos Sainz, as Harry said, an amazing job. The other Ferrari is Charles Leclerc, that we really had most of our hopes on coming into qualifying, not able to deliver when the pressure was really on.
Absolutely. Well, Max Verstappen complaining of understeer during qualifying. He's had brakes not biting throughout the weekend as well, but he managed to take pole position here in Melbourne. Let's hear from the Dutch driver. He's been speaking to Sam Power in the media pen.
Max, congratulations. That looked like a huge battle out there.
Yeah, it was not easy for me to also get the best out of the car, because the whole weekend we've been struggling a bit to put the balance together. But we kept on finding little improvements here and there, even throughout qualifying. And very happy, of course, to put it on pole, because to be honest, after Q1 and even Q2, I was not expecting, to fight for pole.
And it looks like the conditions are just so tricky out there. We're seeing so many cars struggle, particularly with the long runs going into the race tomorrow. I mean, can anyone do this on a one-stop? Do you think it's possible?
No, I don't think so. Personally, the tires are too soft for that. You never know if there's a lot of safety cars and stuff, but normally not. And that also, is the same for us.
Do you think you have a fight in your hands from Ferrari?
Yeah, I do think so. They've been very quick all weekend, over one lap, long run pace as well. So they seem to have it all well set up, let's say like that. And for us, it was really more about still getting to grips with things. So hopefully we made the right choices also for tomorrow in the race.
So that was Max Verstappen, your pole sitter for the Australian Grand Prix. Is he going to lead the field away and then just disappear into the distance? Is it all going to come down to the start? Or actually, have we got a little bit of a sort of game of chess for tomorrow's Grand Prix, with the strategy playing a pretty big part? I think probably a bigger part than usual here, Harry.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of everything. First of all, it will all depend on the start. Verstappen has the obvious advantage. Sainz also saying that he might not be, he's not going to be at 100% fitness level coming back from his appendix surgery. So being able to keep up a relentless attack over the course of 58 laps is going to be a real hard task for him. So far, though, the signs are good. The track, there are some overtaking points, particularly in the run down to turn 3. You've also got turn 11. We've got 4 DRS zones as well, and several corners were widened and altered a couple of years ago to try and increase the chances of overtaking and make the flow a little bit better. So I think we are going to see some good chances for overtaking and for some moves to be made. In terms of that strategy, though, you're absolutely right. Traditionally, it can be a one-stop. Right now, with the sort of punchy calls that Pirelli have made, bringing the softest tyre in the range, and particularly on that C5 soft tyre, going one step softer than last year, and coming into this weekend, that tyre was the least used on the current generation cars. We have very little information about how it would perform. It's going to be a step into the unknown. Nobody, though, as a result, has trialled the C3 hard compound too much, because they only get 2 sets of that compound. So everyone's been going on the softs and the mediums so far this weekend. That hard compound is going to be really interesting, because no one quite knows how that's going to react in the race, because they haven't had to experience this tyre for as an extended amount of time as they will do in the race. They do know this tyre better than the softs, but this is what could cause a bit of a split in strategy. We could have some thinking they could manage it on a one-stop. We could have some thinking they could do it on a two-stop, and that's going to be where that pin falls. Which side of the line are you going to go? So there's a lot at play here. Strategy and the track going to make it a good one.
The other thing about strategy in this particular race is you've always got to have in the back of your mind and factor into those strategy calls the fact that there's an incredibly high chance of a safety car here. Last year we had 3 red flags during the Grand Prix. It's chaos, because particularly when you got all night, as it will be this weekend, 19 cars. We're not going to have Logan Sargent taking part as he's handed his car over to his teammate Alex Albon, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But I think the fact that there's such a closeness of the walls, the circuit bites you, it punishes mistakes. We've seen it all weekend with drivers going off and damaging floors, damaging chassis. When those things happen in the race, it can neutralise the Grand Prix. It can bring out a safety car. You can even get red flags and restarts. So you've got to be really flexible when it comes to race strategy. And I think what you just said there, Harry, it's going to be a nice mix of 1s and 2 stoppers potentially, plus this potential hand grenade of red flags and safety cars being thrown in, where everything goes up in the air and you then have to decide on the fly what you're going to do. So I don't look at this and see Max Verstappen sitting on pole position thinking this is going to be a walk in the park, same old, same old. I see this being close enough that particularly the start can change everything, and decisions on the strategy. And also, let's not forget, Red Bull have got 2 cars in this fight at the front. Ferrari really only got 1 because Charles Leclerc a little bit further back. So I think it's all still to play for, and that gives us good enough reason to be excited going into tomorrow.
Oh, you've built it up nicely, Mark. I like it. Lots of variables for the Grand Prix, and I think the tyre degradation is incredibly high. A lot of drivers expecting that during the race as well. Well, let's hear from Carlos Sainz then. As Harry mentioned, he is fresh from surgery on his appendix, had an appendicitis in Saudi Arabia, has been operated on, keyhole surgery, just 3 little tiny scars, and he's managed to put that all behind him, and he finished P2 today, so he'll line up on the front row alongside Max Verstappen. But let's listen to the Spanish driver's thoughts after that session.
Carlos, what a way to bounce back with adversity. You've got to be happy with that performance. So close in Q3.
Yes, it was close, and it was a very good quali and a very good feeling, to be back on form. Even though I'm obviously not 100% to put it on the front row of the grid after everything I've been through in the last 2 weeks. It's been a really good achievement, and I have to be very happy, very proud, and now keep recovering and keep trying to get myself healthy, because I have a good feeling with this car, and I've started the season struggling.
Quick question, can you get him down into turn one off the lights?
That's the target, especially because at the start is where I'm gonna suffer the least, so that would definitely make my life a lot easier.
That was Carlos Sainz speaking to Sam Power earlier on. And for the second race in a row, Ferrari managing to split the two Red Bulls in qualifying. It'll be interesting to see how it will all turn out when it comes to the podium. So it was Sergio Perez behind Carlos Sainz in P3, and then Lando Norris P4 in the McLaren. Now, I don't know about you guys, but at the end of FP3, I was feeling a little doubtful about how McLaren were going to go. Oscar Piastri finished FP3 P8, and Lando Norris was P10. And then suddenly, in quali trim, it's all looking pretty positive. P4 for Lando, P6 for Oscar Piastri, the home hero. They're right there, just behind Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen. So McLaren really taking it to the other teams this weekend.
Yeah, I think they became the beneficiaries, really, of the two Aston Martins having pretty woeful performances in the final part of qualifying. Up until that point, it had looked like a bit nip and tuck between the Astons and the McLarens for best of the rest, with maybe throw the Mercedes of Russell in there. But Norris, right at the very end, managing to split Perez and Leclerc. Leclerc had a rough end to his qualifying. Really great start for Norris for this race. Piastri has actually looked like the better of the two McLarens so far this weekend, but I'm pretty sure Piastri is all fired up. Starts inside the top six, and he's had a mega start to the year as well. Qualified 8th in Bahrain, qualified 5th in Saudi Arabia, sits inside the top 5 of the drivers' standing, scored his first points in Formula One at this track last year. McLaren are in the fight. I think they are not as in for a podium shout as I was saying at the start of the weekend, but it's Melbourne, and as we talk about the red flag situation, you never know. I think Norris is going to have a fight on his hands with Leclerc, however, in the race trim.
Yeah, I agree. Although I would say that looking at the practice sessions from Friday, particularly FP2, where they started to do the longer runs, fill the car up with fuel and just see how the car performs on long stints, how the tyres degrade, Piastri especially, but McLaren in general, look like they have a decent race car. Now, we know that Ferrari, they do struggle to some extent. If you compare them to Red Bull, they don't look as good in the race trim normally. But with McLaren versus Ferrari, I think that actually is going to be really close. So the start and the fact that Norris is in amongst it, I think we could have a really interesting race between those two teams.
It was quite interesting at the end of Friday's running, so at the end of the FP2, Lando Norris said he was finding it hard to build his confidence during those sessions, and it was very windy on Friday as well here at Albert Park Circuit. It's been a bit blustery here again today on quali day, but managing to find some confidence to take P4 in qualifying, and Oscar Piastri 2 places behind. So I'm really intrigued to see how McLaren go, and as you say, perhaps race pace will be not too bad for the Woking outfit, and they sandwich Charles Leclerc, who is, I think, also optimistic from P5. Obviously feels normally confident in the car, but backing out of that final lap, a little bit disappointing. But yes, McLaren, P4 and P6. Right, we're going to take a short break, and after that we will discuss Mercedes' struggles and, of course, the rest of the field ahead of the Australian Grand Prix. The paddock here at Albert Park Circuit is starting to thin out a little bit, or perhaps that's just because I'm down towards the lower end of the paddock and the grid. But yes, it's been a wonderful day here in Melbourne. Bright blue skies in the afternoon, having been a bit overcast in the morning, and it's warmed up a little bit. So it's beautiful conditions for the race weekend. And let's talk about the drivers a little further down the grid now. We've got to P6 so far on the podcast, but Harry Benjamin and Mark Priestley, I want to talk about Mercedes now, because in P7 it's George Russell, quite some way ahead of his teammate Lewis Hamilton, who couldn't make it into Q3. What is going on there, guys, with the Silver Arrows?
Well, came into this weekend with issues, particularly in the high-speed corners, and this is a track that has a few high-speed corners, so already the pessimism was a little bit there. But Hamilton in particular just seems to be having a roller coaster ride himself with this car. The team going the complete wrong way with setup in between FP1 and FP2. He actually was feeling pretty positive after FP1, and then very, very negative after FP2. Then suddenly, the final practice session, stuck the soft compounder tyre, was in the top 4, within a tenth of Sainz, and looked like the mojo's back. Here we go. And then he gets pipped and knocked out of qualifying and starts at best 11th. It's a team that screams lost, and for it's so hard to comprehend that, I think, because of the success and the dominance that they've had over the last few years. But I just get the sense of they're not making any big strides or improvements. Yeah, this car might not be as bad as last year's, but it's not a mega.
Is it not as bad as last year's?
Well,
I mean, actually, at
I think
times
Hamilton's not being as negative as you would expect him to be.
Well, no. I mean, he's got a future in red, and he's probably looking forward to that over the next few months.
I think he was being negative yesterday. He was saying it was one of the worst sessions he had in a long time.
No, I agree.
I think that's pretty negative.
I agree, but last year he was saying all these things. This is the evil sister of whatever, and we can't. And the team as a whole saying they can't wait to see the back of that the 2023 car, and now it seems like they are finding the optimistic side. The baseline is good. We've sorted some of the problems, but
I mean, to look at that from a slightly technical perspective, they completely redesigned the car this year, because the one that they've persisted with over the last 2 years, they conceded they were going in the wrong direction with. So they've kind of followed the trend that most other teams have gone. That meant a total redesign, not just of the individual components, but the actual concept of the car. That takes a lot of learning to understand. And what you're looking for when you design one of these modern generation cars is a car that has as wide a window of performance as possible. And what I mean by that is, you can get the performance out of the car with tyres in a sort of wide range of temperature, and you find it, with that car's characteristics, easy to get into that window. They've got the opposite of that. So they've got a car that has a narrow band of performance, and it's really difficult to get it into that temperature window and keep it in there. So you might go around one lap, the tyres are just inside that window, you've got grip, but the next lap it might have just fallen outside of that temperature window and you've got zero grip. And that's the sort of inconsistencies that I'm hearing from Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, particularly Lewis Hamilton, and that's what results at times like today in a really disappointing lap time and result not making it through to Q3.
And it was the end of Friday's running where Lewis Hamilton said that they made those changes going into FP2 to continue our learning, is what he said. And that sounds more like they're doing experiments, Harry, like they don't understand this car. When you sort of want to be making changes because you think that's going to add performance, and you almost know it's going to add performance, and that's the direction you want to go in. But it does sound like they are, as you say, really quite lost. And we were sort of thinking they'd have turned the page and turned the tide coming into 2024 with that new concept.
When you keep having drivers going in different directions on setup and then flicking the switch and going back to something else, and these are all red flags. This is not how this team, with the resources that they have, should be operating. They have fundamentally failed to understand this new ground effect era. They haven't had a car capable since 2022 when these new regulations came in, and now you absolutely, if you didn't before, you understand why Lewis Hamilton has made the jump, and he's got to grin and bear this final season. I wonder, the longer this goes on, when does Hamilton check out and go, well, there's no point in flogging a dead horse, I'll think about the Ferrari drive now. Think
about getting on a prancing one.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
No, he's going to be committed to the project for the whole year. I don't think Lewis Hamilton's like that, and I think it's in Mercedes' interest to keep being interested in him as well, and including him as much as they can for as long as they can this season, because it would be embarrassing, wouldn't it, to end on bad terms? And I think they'll get the best out of him, and he'll probably get the best out of the team if they can keep it all very civil going right through to the season end.
I do
I'm sure there are some meetings he'll perhaps not be part of.
Yeah, I do agree. I just think, just seeing some of the things that happened last year, when they brought in pretty much, was it Monaco last year, a new car design essentially.
Yeah.
But the more I've heard of people talk about that, there wasn't really any major change. It was just to placate Hamilton and Toto Wolff, to see that something was different, or to just give them something else, because what they currently had wasn't good enough. That's all they're doing. They're treading water, and that can't continue.
No, well, let's hear from Lewis Hamilton then to hear how he was feeling at the end of that difficult qualifying session, unable to make it through to Q3.
Lewis, 600ths of a second, only the difference between you getting into Q3. Walk us through that session.
P3 felt really good for us and felt really optimistic because we had made some changes. All of a sudden we were somehow right in the fight, and then we got into qualifying. I don't know what happens, but we were nowhere, or I was nowhere. I lost a 10th or so in the last corner, and that put me out of Q2.
Is it hard to adjust it? Is it the wind? Is it the conditions? Is it the car? I mean, it looks like it's tricky out there for everybody.
I mean, as I said, the car felt good in one session and then it's not in another. And I don't know the answers to that, and the team doesn't know the answer to that, so that's why we are where we are. It's a real challenge.
Well, that was Lewis Hamilton. He'll start from P11 on the grid, and behind him in P12 is Alex Albon, the only Williams on the grid. Now, what a strange story, what a strange circumstance we find ourselves in, an odd chain of events. Alex Albon crashed in FP1. The team were unable to salvage his chassis, and then their team principal, James Vowles, and I'm sure other members of the team, have taken the decision to exclude Logan Sargent from the rest of the race weekend, give Logan Sargent's chassis to Alex Albon, and it's Alex Albon who's going to continue on through the race weekend, not Logan Sargent. It's a very, very strange story, isn't it, guys?
Talk about picking your favourite son.
Well, no, it's not that, is it, though? It's more that Alex Albon is the driver, and I think we can all be honest with this, who's more likely to score points this weekend.
Oh, sorry, so you're more talented, son. But I mean, I agree, you're absolutely right. And this all stems back to the huge production delays that have happened within the Williams organisation. Team principal James Vowles is overseeing a pretty major overhaul in how they go about their business, and that has meant they've been delayed for about I think during the winter they were over a couple of months behind where they should have been. They were very late with their 2024 F1 car, and that has meant they've not been able to have a spare chassis, as you would come to expect as the bare minimum for a team operating at this level. It's not on, and that's how they view it as well. But when you look at the average times for Sargent compared to Albon, he is slower in qualifying and the race compared to his teammate Alex Albon, and in a period in Formula One where the top 5 teams lock out pretty much the point scoring paying positions, the ones behind are fighting for 10th place maybe at best and a chance for a point. You put the driver who has got more experience and who could snag a point in the race and sacrifice the one that doesn't have that experience and skill level. Yeah,
there's no question in anybody in Formula One's mind that Alex Albon is a better driver. That's the brutal, honest truth of it. And exactly as you say, that gives the team the best choice. In your position as James Vowles is as team principal, he has to make and it will have been a very tough decision, he has to make a decision that's got the best interests of his team at heart. And look, we saw last time out in Saudi Arabia, that one solitary point going to the Haas team, that's the sort of thing, that 1 point could make a huge difference come the end of the season.
A kind of $10 million difference.
Absolutely, yeah, totally. It genuinely can. We might be talking about 1 or 2 points that separates the teams in, 6th place down to last place. And so days like today, tough decisions like this are part of James Vowles' job now, and it's now up to Alex Albon to go and deliver. And I've got to say, he did a very, very good job this afternoon in qualifying. Didn't quite make it through to the final part of qualifying, but put in a decent enough lap that gives him and his team now the best shot of scoring that point.
Well, let's hear from Alex Albon. He managed to get up to P12, but as you say, Mark, I think he would have hoped for more. Let's hear how he's feeling after that qualifying session.
Yeah, it's not been easy. I can't say that I've slept well last night, or it's not just me though. It's the whole team. Obviously, it's not how we want to go racing as a team, and most of all to Logan as well. It's very tough, and it was my error that created the issue in FP1. So very strange. In some ways, the best thing I could do was to do a good performance, and that's kind of where I channeled my energy, as it were, making sure I delivered for the team as much as I could. So to do that, I had to put the whole thing away and focus on the job at hand.
And in terms of approaching tomorrow's Grand Prix, obviously it's quite tricky for the team at the moment when it comes to parts and problems and spending. If you make a mistake tomorrow, what does that mean for the coming races? What's the future looking like for Williams in the next couple of weeks?
It's tough, but it's been tough since race 1. We haven't crashed in race 1, race 2, and one time we do crash, it's obviously very penalising. So we're going to be on the back foot until a spare chassis arrives, and it's not just the chassis, there are other parts as well that we're fighting for. So it doesn't help, obviously we've done Jeddah and Australia, some of the worst tracks for it. Hopefully when we get to Japan, China, Miami, it'll calm down a little bit. It's not easy. We've just got to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Drive between those white lines.
There you go, and beyond. No, not beyond.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Williams are going to have to be fairly tentative, I would say, as we go through the rounds in Japan and China, because an extra chassis is not just suddenly going to be created. So it's going to be some time. They're going to have to really be careful. And as Alex said, it's not just a chassis, it's other spare parts as well, Mark. How up against it are Williams at the moment? Massively, they're up against it on track. They're now even more so up against it off track. But it is part of this major rebuilding that Harry touched upon there. They've got a longer term vision than trying to sort of set the world alight and win championships in a year's time or 2 years' time, even 3 years' time. They're looking at 5 years' time. James has come in and taken stock of what he's got in this organisation and found it to be way below where I think even he thought he was going to find himself. He's now got to rebuild from the ground up. I think he's a great person to do that. Taking these tough decisions that he had to take this weekend are part of that job, but so is putting the right people and processes in place, and that's going to take time to come through. This is a very tough learning curve that they're on right now.
But you know what, as well, this begs a bigger question, that a team, one of 10 teams in Formula One, the pinnacle of motorsport, a team that has been on the back foot and struggling for many years now, has been making slow, steady signs of improvement, but the basic fundamentals of having spare parts aren't there right now. And when you look at Formula One in the bigger picture, other teams want in on this sport, and I immediately think of Andretti, the huge American outfit who were vying for the 11th entry spot, and they were denied that spot by Formula One because they didn't feel that they would be competitive by the time their entry came around. But I actually think Andretti, with the huge resources that they have available, they've just announced this massive complex in America that they're building, which is, double the size of what Williams have, and the heritage and the money that they have behind them. A team like that could come in and have a spare part. But when a team that's established in the sport doesn't, that to me doesn't sit very well, and we're denying opportunity. I
think there's a difference here. Williams are not a team that is simply not capable of delivering. They are, but it is going to take time. They're now starting the process of becoming a team fighting its way back up the order, and under great leadership, I think, with resource behind them. We're not talking about some of the teams that came in 10 years ago that couldn't even afford to turn up and didn't have a uniform for their guys. We're not talking about that situation. We're talking about a legacy team that's got a lot of history and success in this sport. I firmly believe they're going through a tough time, but I firmly believe they'll get back to success.
Yeah, but how many times have we said they're going through a tough time for Williams? Do
you know what, though? This tough time, the timeline that you've just spelled out, Mark, it worries me more that it's not going to be quick enough for Alex Albon. I think he's going to be looking for pastures new, and I think, it's ironic almost that we're talking about Alex Albon getting the chassis this weekend, being the one that's going to race, and Williams getting behind him, and you still think, well, they're getting behind him, but he may not want to stick around with them if it's going to take that long to turn their fortunes around. I think it's going to be a really interesting story to watch unfold, and I hope they can get on top of these parts and make sure they have a spare chassis, because if any more prangs happen, they could find themselves in a similar situation.
The other issue as well is that the detriment this has on kind of both drivers here. There is the other argument, which I don't think many people believe, that Albon, he crashed the car, should he not be the one to face the consequences? I think everyone's fairly not on that one. But on the other side, the confidence in Logan Sargent, what does this do now to the American in his second season, both for his on-track ability, which has now immediately been quite publicly called into question, I would say. It was already sceptical.
I was going to say, wasn't it already being called into question?
Yeah, but the team were fervently behind him and supporting him for a second season. But when James vows and says we're going to go with Alex Albon, that inadvertently goes, well, we don't believe you're the one that's going to be capable of scoring the points, Logan. Sorry. And
I don't think that's a surprise to him.
In brackets, I would add, this is probably going to be your final year in Formula One.
I don't think that's a surprise to him. I think the real complication is the fact that Logan Sargent is a paying customer. He's a paying driver, through sponsorships and partnerships. He's paying for this seat. So imagine the complications involved in making this decision from a commercial point of view. How do you turn someone who's paying for the seat
Get some money back.
Well, I mean, it may well be. That may well be part of the kind of agreement they've had to come to. Who knows?
Yeah, it's difficult times, frustrating times, but Logan Sargent was there during the sessions watching the session progress and how Alex Albon was getting on. I'm sure it was frustrating, but he managed to put on a brave face. But I think at the end of the season, if Logan Sargent's contract is not renewed, I think everyone will think back to this weekend in Melbourne and think this was probably the starting point of it all unravelling. Talking of unravelling, and it's pretty seamless, this segue, Daniel Ricciardo. I'm afraid that is it's a tricky situation he finds himself in, and he was really downbeat in the media pen talking to me earlier. Let's listen to what he had to say. Of course, racing in front of the home crowd, he will start from P18 on the grid. That is second last because we only have 19 drivers. Let's hear it from Daniel Ricciardo.
Honestly, I don't think it's sunk in yet. I'm still just all the rage is internal right now, so yeah, I don't think it's really sunk in. But the lap was obviously okay. I used too much track. I was fighting it, but the lap was all I had, and I was more disappointed that I was still slower. To be honest, I was still a tenth off Yuki, and we've been struggling all weekend, and that was all I had, and it's still not enough. And then obviously the track limits is the salt in the wound. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about it right now.
You thought you could get into Q3 at the end of yesterday's running. What did you change overnight that maybe has made it more difficult for that to have actually been achieved, even if the track limits hadn't played a part?
I mean, I think we certainly made a few changes. I actually think the car was I felt like that lap was all it had, so I was pretty happy with the lap and, let's say, the potential of the car. I felt like I was using all the track and doing what I needed to. Obviously, forget turn 4, but for the rest of it, I don't think there was much more in it, if anything. So it all felt okay, but even the laps that have felt good were still not quick compared to Yuki, and I don't believe I should be behind. I back myself, so that's it's something certainly a little bit difficult at the moment. There were some things after Saudi, but yeah, this weekend's a bit more challenging, so we'll keep digging. But yeah, I start 19th, so I don't really know.
18th, isn't it? Because there's only 19 runners, so there's some positivity there.
True.
It's not nice seeing you confused. I feel like you're a bit sad.
I don't know. I'm still a bit skeptical about some things, so yeah, that's kind of what's occupying my mind at the moment.
Now, you might have thought I sounded harsh, Harry, but let's just go back a bit, because in Hungary last year, when he came back onto the grid, everyone was talking about whether he could take the second seat alongside Max Verstappen and oust Sergio Perez. People are now talking about whether he can hang on to his seat in F1. It is totally different. He is being outperformed by Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki Tsunoda was faster than him in all practice sessions leading up to qualifying, and then Yuki has outqualified him as well today. Yuki will start P8, and as I said before, we heard from Daniel, he'll start P18. Something's not going right for him at RB. What is it?
If you were a brand new fan who didn't know anything about the history about Ricciardo and Red Bull, and were told, yeah, Ricciardo is the guy they're thinking for the second seat, and you look at the results and you compare them to Yuki Tsunoda and you go, what? You mean Tsunoda's the one that's in the frame for the second seat, right? That's where we're at. And Tsunoda's a good driver, but he's very inexperienced compared to Daniel Ricciardo, and everyone was expecting Ricciardo to come in and wipe the floor, and he hasn't wiped the floor. And even if he was beating him by a tenth or two, that to me still wouldn't have been enough. He needed to absolutely wipe the floor with Yuki Tsunoda, and he has fundamentally failed to do that. He had a few races towards the end of last season, and he has started on the wrong foot this season. He would have got through to Q2 had he not had his lap time deleted for track limits, but he was still slower than Tsunoda and has been throughout the weekend.
And don't forget, track limits violations, that's a driver error.
Exactly, very good point. And a fundamental driver error as well. And he was the only driver to have a lap time deleted when it counted.
Yeah. Look, I think you're absolutely right. He did need a way better showing than this. I think we all expected it. But now looking at the results we're seeing now, what seems to be consistently from Daniel Ricciardo, unfortunately, if you go back a bit further and you go back to his McLaren career over the last few years, we were asking the same questions. I think even he was asking the same questions. I heard him say earlier on today, I believe the lap time should be there. I can't understand why it's not coming. We've heard that now for a number of years from Daniel Ricciardo. And I'd love to see this guy get back to his blistering form, get back to his best, and get back to the sharp end of Formula One. I think so many people would. He's a character, he's a lovely guy. But ultimately, Formula One, and especially that Red Bull programme, is looking for the next Max Verstappen. It's not looking like that's Daniel Ricciardo, is it?
And the thing is as well, they must have seen something in Ricciardo back at that Pirelli test in Silverstone last year to have prompted them to remove Nick de Vries and put him back in that car. So they must have seen something on the data to go, yes, Ricciardo still has something. Or is it out of loyalty and wanting to kind of bring their driver home after having been out in the wilderness at Renault and McLaren, and yeah, he got the win in Monza, but overall he was trounced by Lando Norris. It's just a strange scenario, and I equate it to the Mercedes situation. You know, they're lost with their car. I think Ricciardo is completely lost with his driving right now. And look, if he suddenly turns it around and comes through and finishes the top 6 and completely outscores Tsunoda for the rest of the year, then hey ho, we'll bury this podcast in the archives. But right now, I don't think that's a reality, and I think a young driver should have been given the shot in the first place rather than Ricciardo coming back in last year.
They may still bury the podcast in the archive. It may not be linked to Daniel Ricciardo. Well, look, I think there are lots of people, and I think probably around 400,000 people who hope Daniel Ricciardo can turn it around this weekend. The Australian fans are here in their hundreds of thousands. They can't wait to see what their home heroes can do. But from 18th on the grid, Daniel Ricciardo's got his work cut out. Right behind him is Zhou Guanyu. He picked up some damage. He'll start P19. And actually, I'll give you the rest of the top 10. Behind Alex Albon was P12. Valtteri Bottas P13, Kevin Magnussen, Esteban Ocon, Nico Hülkenberg, Pierre Gasly, then it's Daniel Ricciardo and Zhou Guanyu. There you go, you've got the full set. So who do you see on the podium alongside Max Verstappen? Because I'm assuming he's on the top step, right?
I think it's looking likely. I think he's in the best position to start this race. He's also got the best car in race conditions. We've seen that over and over again. So if he can execute well, and we haven't seen any evidence to suggest that he can't do that week in, week out, I think he's going to be favourite to win the race. I think Carlos Sainz is really good, looking good behind him, but I actually think Sergio Perez might find his way past Carlos Sainz. Carlos is not up to. Well, Carlos is not up to full fitness. I think that the Red Bull looks better than the Ferrari in race trim. I just think, I know it's not what people want to hear, but I can sort of see it happen. I hope we get a good fight to make that happen, but that could be the result.
Verstappen, Perez, Norris on the podium. I think we'll see some drama, a bit of a race of attrition again tomorrow, and I think that is how it will end up, personally.
You think Carlos Sainz is the victim of that, then?
No, I think Charles Leclerc is more of a victim. He's in a bit of a 5th spot. He's got feisty Piastri behind him, Russell as well, Yuki Tsunoda all right behind him. Could get a bit tight down into turn 1, then again through into turn 3. I think Sainz might just struggle because he's still not quite at 100% yet, and I'm happy to be proved wrong on that one.
No, you never know. Maybe it was the appendix that was holding him back all this time from taking another race win. You never know.
Maybe it's the appendix that's holding us all back.
Well, he is a bit lighter now, isn't he? A little bit lighter, saved a few grand. Can I make one more claim for tomorrow's race? I think Alex Albon is going to score a point. It'll be a great story, and it will justify a lot of the efforts that have gone into giving this opportunity today.
Okay, well, we'll watch out for that one.
What about you?
Oh, okay. I was trying to escape.
No.
Okay, well, I think Max Verstappen. Should I tell you what I said coming into the weekend? And I'm just going to stick with that. It's so not going to happen now. But Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Fernando Alonso is what I had. So that's first, 5th, and 10th
What
on
a
the
race!
grid.
What a race that would be.
Guys, stranger things have happened, especially here in Melbourne after last year's race. Anything can happen around this Albert Park circuit. Oh, well, who knows? It'll all unfold as it is meant to. The Australian Grand Prix is hopefully going to give us some entertainment. Harry Benjamin and Mark Priestley, thank you very much for your time. I'm looking forward to the Grand Prix already. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.